side of I started my business long before I had children. And certainly I specifically waited because I could not imagine what that would look like.
This is prior Google era.
Well, this is
there's
2008.
no YouTube, no Instagram, no social media.
Thing I didn't have the labeling for it if it wasn't something we had previously made together. How was I going to?
Hello, I'm Kristina Budaeva, and this is my podcast, One-on-One with Kristina, where we talk about entrepreneurial journey, glorious wins, and painful failures, everything and anything to do with the business life day to day. For this episode, I have a special guest in the studio. This woman is a successful entrepreneur who has achieved outstanding results in the bath, body, and home goods industry. She's my secret business confidant for the past 12 years. Online marketing e-commerce pioneer with her unique newsletter strategy and brand communication. She knows how to build raving fans and loyal customers and have done so for 16 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Anne Dardick from Dot and Lil here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to start this. We've known each other for 14 years. And we have met at the Christmas bazaar in the basement of Sanity Church. We were both part of handmade community event, and we were renting tables.
Yeah. Your business has changed more. as we can see from this description, we still technically sell something that could be sold there. I feel like you've had many iterations since then.
But over the 14 years that I know you personally, since that meeting in San Viator, I don't know, how have you started your business? Can you tell me that story about yourself? Where the idea come from? How did, all of a sudden, we end up to that meeting point? Because you started 16 years, so 2 years prior to that San Viator encounter. So tell me the beginning of it.
Yeah. So I started the company originally with my sister. So we're from a family where everything is handmade. I mean, since then, I think you've met my parents. You know more about the whole backstory. But I'm really from a family where everything is handmade. So everything from jam to anything else that was in our house was usually made from scratch. And so there was a year where my sister had made, as gifts for Christmas, she had made a bunch of bath salts and lip balms and other body care products and given them as gifts. And that was just like anything else that we normally would have done. Our gifts were often handmade. There was nothing unusual in that for us. And then just after that, Christmas, we were both working in totally separate fields. My sister was working for a clothing company. I was working in events management, and we were both laid off just in February, early February. And February in Montreal is a cruel month. So we were both kind of dejected and looking for something to do and started thinking about a project we could work on together. And again, projects were not something unusual in our family. We're very creative people. We like to do stuff. So the fact that we were looking for something to work on together was not at all unusual. And we landed on this idea of making some of our own skincare products and selling them. And that was partially because my sister at that time was trying to go to grad school in the United States, which is a very expensive proposition. And so she was hoping we could work on some sort of project together that would help finance that goal. So we made a bunch of products, and the idea was that we would sell them locally, just ourselves, and that would help contribute to her grad school application process and the costs of eventually going to grad school. And we started that, and it became clear to me almost immediately that this was not like any other project for me that we might have worked on together. So for my sister, it was. For my sister, it was like another creative project among many creative projects. And for me, as soon as I sort of got introduced to the world of fragrances and skincare and bath and body products, that was it for me. I knew that was something that I really wanted to put a lot more time into, and I sort of immediately became obsessed with the idea of working on it on a longer term basis. So what started off as a little project to keep ourselves entertained after being laid off became something that was really important to me.
Where did you get the recipes? Because we are talking, ladies and gentlemen, this is prior Google era.
Well, this is
there's
2008.
no YouTube, no Instagram, no social media. This is Wikipedia. I think it was like early humble beginnings. I mean, the internet was rusty. I mean, where did you get the recipes? Because I mean, for me, the whole body and home care and like bath care products, I mean, those are chemically involved goods, right? Like where did you come out with the recipes? Like what was the inspiration?
So it was a totally different time. I look at companies in my category that start now or that start like in the past 5 or 10 years, let's say even, and it's completely different than what I went through. As you're saying, this is pre-Instagram. I believe was the beginnings of YouTube's. There was some content on YouTube of other people making similar kinds of things. And what there was forums was a bigger thing at the time. And so I had joined a forum where there was a whole bunch of people making all sorts of different things. And I learned a lot from that. But I think the basic thing to remember is that I was used to making things from scratch and to figuring stuff out on my own. Just everything in the way that I was raised, and I went to an alternative school that was an art school. So like everything, I was used to figuring stuff out step by step and not really knowing what I was doing as I went along, which is a really important business skill actually, which I recommend to anyone in the sense that like there's pretty much nothing that you can't sort of take apart and figure out step by step. And that's what I did in terms of formulating. So we tried it. We just figured it out. We had really basic recipes to begin with. A lot of what we make is still very basic. I've never been a fan of really complex body care formulas. I actually think that there's something better about something that's very, very simple and doesn't have a lot of ingredients. So yeah, we figured it out one product at a time. And then now things are very different, right? Now, when I need to, I can consult a chemist externally. I can hire someone for help with a more advanced formula. But over the years, I have also become a very good, strong formulator on my own. My high school chemistry teacher would be shocked. I think I failed high school chemistry, guys. It was not a strong subject for me. So,
oh my God.
But if it had been taught like this, I always think that maybe would have made a difference for me. Like if chemistry had been taught with applied formulas, like soap making, saponification as part of school curriculum,
oh my God, that
would be
great.
The dream. Like,
revolutionize everything. The whole
so much more interesting
you know?
to me anyway, to my personality type and my learning type. Like that's how you would hook me. Like that's how you would get me interested in a subject, is by showing an applied, and then integrated into that is the reason you're doing it. Like there's not a real reason that's clear other than advancing academically. There's not a real reason that's clear to a lot of what's taught in school. So I think something applied like that would have made a big difference for me.
And talking about those early beginnings, what were the biggest challenges that you encountered at the beginning of your business? What was those? I know there's not pleasant to think about, but
No, I love that time. So my sister pretty quickly realized that this for her was a project, that it wasn't something that she was like as hooked into as I was. So she did what she was supposed to do. She got into grad school in the US and moved to the United States, and now runs a separate business there in a totally different field, but pretty much from the beginning. So she was there with me for the developing the first products and sort of coming up with the brand name and the basic idea. But very quickly, she was no longer involved. So it's an interesting part of our story in that the beginnings of our story are really my sister and I together coming up with this idea. But anything that is actually sort of the business part of it, by the time we got to that stage, she was already mainly gone. So we had done one local show together where we had sold very well, actually, for, I mean, I don't remember what our 2008 numbers would have
Sales
been
were.
for a sale.
Yeah.
But like, I remember in the beginning, you know, one of those first sales, like we sold like $2,000 or $3,000 worth of stuff in a weekend,
Wow,
which like
this is crazy
you know,
good.
I was young too. So like sitting there and splitting up that cash at the end of that weekend, like that felt really good. Like that felt to us like we were onto
love
something really cool, right? So, you know, whereas now that might not make a huge dent in terms of a sales figure, it does. It's an important like step in the beginning of a proof of concept or something that makes you feel good about what you're doing and shows you that people are interested in what you're doing. That felt really good.
I also was always inspired the way you give birth to brands. And you graduated from Dawson Creative Arts, right, program?
Yeah.
And over the years, you give birth to many different brands under the same industry. You know, you kind of dissect them to gearing towards the communities they're going to be resonating with. And the question I have for you, how do you find that brand story, craft that brand story, and tune that unique voice so it would resonate with the end customer? You know, because I know you have a men's line, you have a mainstream line, and then you have kind of odd gam, like more elite Dot and Lil. Of course, you're like...
Yeah. So poorly, basically, with many terrible iterations. I always have a lot of admiration for people and brands who come out with things that look sort of finished right from the start. I don't know if you know what I mean. And part of that is just, you know, we all have some level of imposter syndrome. And when you see something from the outside, it's very easy to think to yourself that they're doing it better than you. At least that's how my brain works. But certainly the way that I work has always been many, many, many iterations. So like our first branding was terrible. And that was mainly not my strong suit in the beginning. So our very first labels and that kind of work, all of our graphic design was originally done by my sister. And so that left me with a real problem once she was no longer involved of, okay, well, that was not your specialty. I could not afford to pay a graphic designer externally at that stage. So it was like, okay, well, where are you going to go from here? How's this going to, you know, you want to launch a new thing. I didn't have the labeling for it. If it wasn't something we had previously made together, how was I going to do that? And I think that I always have a lot of admiration for brands that I feel take the more professional route on that and right from the start think, well, I'm going to put this together in some way where I can get external help from an expert. The way that I work has always been to stubbornly chip away at things that I don't know how to do, for better or for worse, right? Sometimes that's the right answer and sometimes it's a terrible answer. But so for graphic design, I still do all of our graphic design. This is 16 years later, and I basically taught myself every program that I needed, and our packaging has gotten progressively, you know, more complex and more sophisticated, and I've taught myself every step of that. There are times in the more recent past where I've outsourced part of that, thinking to myself, like, maybe this is a part of my business that I don't need to own anymore. And now it's really something where it's one of the last things that I struggle to delegate, because I am actually now, I do feel like it is where I express my creative vision the best myself, and getting that translation, that vision really well executed by an external person is very difficult. So it's now something, you know, in the short list of tasks that I would like to keep that I really enjoy, graphic design is now part of it. Originally, those were not skills that I had, but I taught them to myself over many years.
But you managed to speak to your audience through like editorial shots. And you know what I mean? And people do resonate with them. How do you come out with the concept? How do you know how to speak to, let's say, men's line, or let's say men's care, or mainstream line, you know, like...
Well, so photography is the same. For a long time, I did all of our photography, and really for far longer than I should have. And, you know, I think I have had some success doing that. But photography, interestingly, unlike graphic design, is really an area that I should have worked externally much more quickly than I did. And now we have a photographer that I love working with and who I have, more easily speak the same language. She really can pull that vision that I have in my head and make it reality and create photos that I love. Otherwise, I get inspiration for that kind of thing from everywhere, but really our whole product line is very floral inspired. And so everything that is actually flowers, garden, nature around me, spending time in my garden is where all the inspiration for all of our editorial stuff comes from. And because that is sort of always renewing itself, there's sort of an endless source of inspiration. As to how well it's executed, that, it's variable. Doesn't always turn out how I want it to. I love some of our photo shoots. I hate some of our photo shoots. I think that's a natural result.
So taking back to that beginning, so you decided to go on your own. Walk me through what are the key significant events that happened to your business kind of over the past 16 years that like milestones that you would consider, you could recall and say, okay, then we got into and this was important, and then we got to this and this was important.
We started doing shows locally and had some small scale success with that. And that felt really good. But relatively quickly, especially once my sister had moved to the US, it became really clear to me that like there was no way in which I could build a sustainable business only on local events. The fact that you are never selling anything unless you are physically present is a real problem with that model, especially in the beginning, I was doing all of our production still. And at that stage, I was doing all of our production from home. And so there was no way in which I was going to be able to build a sustainable business doing all of the production myself and all of the sales myself. And so just by doing those shows, eventually we started to be approached by some local stores, and I liked that model right away. So like the idea that the products could be sold at times when I was not actively selling them myself was great to me from the start. And so for a long time, we functioned with a mix of local events and being carried at local stores. And then relatively quickly, I started trying to build a website. Now, again, this is 2008. So when I look at what this looks like now versus what I did to build a website in 2008, it's just nothing like it. I mean, Shopify did not exist.
Yes.
None of the current platforms for that existed. So we actually had to pay someone to code a website for us. And it looked nothing like it looks now. It was challenging, and the result was a lot less modifiable, a lot less easy to change afterwards. So like now you can have an out-of-the-box website that actually looks quite custom and that you can easily add new products and have sort of dynamic content. That's not something that was easy in 2008. So we had a separate blog. I was very deeply into blogging at that time. I still sometimes go back and look through those blog posts because I really talked a lot about starting the business, and it was very sort of open about all of the behind the scenes parts of what we were doing. I was deeply into Twitter at that time too. I don't think I've touched Twitter in like years and years at this point, but I really shared along the way of as I was building the business what it was that I was going through, which I think now I kind of sometimes miss elements of that transparency, which I don't really have anymore. Certainly that there's a little bit more of a curtain between the behind the scenes and the front of house of our business now.
Oh my God. And and how did you went to international arena? Because now your product is not just locally sold in the stores. Well, let's remember our first trade show together.
Yes.
I kind of pushed it, like we got to know each other, and then I quickly realized that the cost of showcasing your product in the local market almost was exact same as if you would take it to international. A little bit more expensive, the New York prices, of course. But I kind of wiggled myself out and realized that you have a better chance to go international and global once you start showing your product at the New York shows,
Yes.
and that's the first show partner,
Yes.
we're actually partner up. We managed to blend unmanageable.
Yes. So
that was the funniest thing.
We were selling at a bunch of local stores,
Yeah.
and then in 2011,
Yes.
we had done our first trade show, which was the Montreal gift show, which no longer exists,
No.
actually. And that was a wonderful way to start because it was much easier to do it locally and to figure it out locally. And we had met some larger accounts and really ended up with a lot more brick and mortar retailers selling our products from that show. And that show really was a success for us, had gone very well. And I think just after that, the timeline is a bit blurry for me, but I think that same year is when you had approached me about maybe sharing a booth at the New York Gift Show. And I had looked at the New York Gift Show before because I had a family friend in New York who I had visited who was a buyer actually and for a small business and had talked to me about that show for many years, especially once I had launched a product that was heavily sold into the gift industry. She had spoken to me about that show. So I was already aware of that show, and I think I had already visited that show.
Yeah.
And you, I think, had already done some other New York trade shows.
Yes.
And so you had asked if we wanted to do that show, and it was such a leap for me at the time. I remember like the cost, I have no idea what the cost would have been, but I remember it feeling astronomical. And as you're saying, it was really a challenge because we do not at all, either then or now, we do not sell products that are easy to merchandise together. We have totally different brands and totally different looks. And so I remember that being a challenge. And I remember that the show was a challenge because I seem to remember that we were not in a spot that worked for my product. So I was not meeting the correct buyers. Or when I did meet the correct buyers, they were mainly done their shopping in my category because I wasn't placed correctly at that show, right? We were not in a section that worked for my buyers' categories. So yeah, that was a really big challenge. And I remember sort of the heart-sinking feeling of like, I've invested in this show and it's not going to work out. And I know you had similar trade show experiences, your first ones. We've both gone on to have successful shows and less successful shows since then. But certainly that first one I remember being like a really, really intense experience of ups and downs and meeting buyers that I felt like could change everything, but not being sure how to capture that necessarily correctly. And also feeling like I had taken a huge risk that maybe wasn't going to pan out. That was an intense time for sure.
I know. And like going forward, what do you think was the next milestone for you? Is it a bigger production facility, or how did you weather the COVID and diversify towards
you just
different
jumped
markets?
a full decade there, Kristina.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So 2011, I actually, like when we would have done that show, when I did that first trade show in Montreal and when I did that first trade show in New York, I was still producing from my home and I was still doing all of the production myself. And I still was working part-time. So I started the business in 2008 and I worked part-time still, sort of slowly reducing my hours outside of the business until 2011. So in 2011, I was able to quit my job. And when I say I was able to quit my job, like that was not a reasonable decision, to be clear. There was no part of the business that was ready to support me in 2011.
But you bootstrapped yourself. I know
bootstrapped everything.
You bootstrapped everything.
Yes, and
everything was calculated to the penny.
Yeah,
to the penny.
And like also I was relatively young and I didn't have any dependents. It was a high risk move, but also I really had nothing that could go so terribly wrong, right? It was a risk, but there was not that much to lose other than perhaps my pride, which would have suffered greatly. But when I quit my job, I remember being terrified really, but deciding that, I had done as much as I could without having more time resources available to me. So at that time I was working, I sort of went from working 40 hours a week, slowly dwindled my hours down until I was working like 8 hours a week. But basically during that time when I was reducing them, I was working, I would work an 8-hour day and then I would work 10 hours on the business and have very few hours left for anything else. And so I just knew that I was not going to be able to do that and get any further any more quickly. So, the first many years of the business were like very slow, like things happening sort of one at a time very slowly. And I think also, when I say that I admire businesses that sort of come out the gate with like a more complete offering or like a more evolved brand, like I did not do it that way. I like learned one thing at a time and went actually quite slowly, partially because we didn't have outside capital. So there was nothing funding this other than, as you're saying, bootstrapping it based on what we were selling. But I think also my personality type is just really stubborn and I want to understand every piece of it, one piece at a time. And sometimes I wish that I was able to more easily pay for external help and shortcuts. But realistically, in that few years, when I look at it now, I realize, okay, well, you taught yourself graphic design, you taught yourself formulation, you taught yourself production. You taught yourself sales. I had done some sales work in my previous work, but mainly I taught myself how to sell. And so, that time, like it felt like it was going really slowly, but like I was training myself really. And I think with more maturity, and more experience now, it's easy for me to say like I could have, paid to accelerate some of that. But that's just not how my brain works. I like need to chip away at it one piece at a time. And I still am like that. I have more instincts now to allow myself to pause and be like, this is something we should just skip the learning process and pay someone else to do. But I still, it's easy to say that now because I spent those years doing that. But it doesn't, you either need to be willing to pay for that right up front or you need to figure it out one step at a time. And I have a personality type that more frequently defaults to figuring it out one step at a time.
What do you think the biggest misconception people have about entrepreneurs, like in your opinion?
I think people really confuse sales and profit from the outside. I think it's very easy to look at someone having sales success from the outside and think you know what that looks like internally in the business, and you don't. It's very, you could see someone killing it. Their product is everywhere. You see them everywhere. This means absolutely nothing. They could be making $0 in their pocket. So, yeah,
I see that trend very much on Instagram. Like I see a lot of people in the Instagram community that has a large following, like million, 2, 3, 4, 5, but doesn't necessarily it equivalent to dollar amount that they earn in their bank account. So I've seen some bloggers that fairly don't generate quite a large revenue, and suffer, even though they have like golden YouTube buttons and silver buttons and things like that, platinum. And not a lot of them know how to monetize, and it's a difficult journey, you know what I mean? So the number of followers, not necessarily. And speaking of which, like you have such a loyal customer base that follow you for 16 years, over and over, decades, now second decade. How do you do it? How do you keep that communication strong? How do you keep that loyalty? How do you nurture it? What do you do to keep them for 16 years coming back? Your repeat business is big.
My repeat business is big. I think our category lends itself to that. So we have a consumable product, right?
Yeah, but it's highly competitive.
It's highly competitive.
And it's like everywhere. You get bombarded with that cream, this. Plus, you against big brands. Never mind the formulation is different, but you against like a huge brands like Sephora is like, and they have a gazillions dollars of marketing, advertising, but you're loyal.
Well, hold on a minute. Sephora's not a competitor. They're welcome to sell my brand if they want to.
Yes, that's right. They're not competitor.
Just a second.
Yes. Sorry about that. That shows how much I knew about that industry.
No, you're fine.
Sorry about that.
So the product is consumable, which obviously is a help. But I mean, there are things about our products and formulations that are unique. But I think also, like in any business, very good customer service, it really helps with that.
Okay.
Consistency really helps with that. In our industry, new product development is a huge sales driver. it's actually a bit of a problem. It's how beauty brands end up with far too many products, too many SKUs. And I'm certainly not immune to that. We currently have too many SKUs. We're in a season of trying to scale them back to the most successful, which is necessary every once in a while. But yeah, in beauty, new product development, and in my segment, new fragrances are a huge driver of repeat business. If I sell you our peony and olive leaf cream and you love it, when I launch a new fragrance of that cream, you're maybe curious. You want to find out more about what that one would smell like. You read the product description, you're like, ooh, that sounds like it would be almost like a vacation if I could try that fragrance. I want to give that a try. So I think there are unique things about our product, but honestly, as you're saying, there's never, like, we make a good quality product. I think we make it well. We make it locally. I think our packaging is very strong. I think we have a strong brand. I think we have a unique perspective. But honestly, there's never anything as special about a product in my category as people think. And I say that in full sort of humble mode about our own products. I think our products are excellent. Are they better than every other product out there? I don't even think it's necessary to say that or feel that in order to have a unique point of view. There are so many brands in my category. There is so much competition. I just have never found it particularly useful. I think we need to have a unique identity, and we do. But I have never found it particularly useful to need to say, like, we have the best lotion formula on the planet. We have a very good lotion formula. Are there other great lotion formulas out there? Sure. People, if they want to buy from us, should buy from us because they like the product and it makes them feel good, and because our brand makes them feel good.
I think they also relate to story. They love supporting you. You've always been like upfront talking about it, and
I think that's a big factor.
That's connection.
And certainly I do think that there's just an element of consistency. So like when I think back to like the cohort of brands like mine that started like at the same time as me, they are not around. There are not that many brands like mine that really have staying power. And I think that's true outside of my category too. I mean, small business is very, very difficult and the success rate is not high. And so at some point a few years ago, I think you and I actually had like a celebratory drink where we were just like had a drink about like toasting to the fact that we still existed.
I know. We one of those marks like 15 plus years in business.
Yes.
This is very unique,
It's
especially
very rare.
in the female entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Like full disclosure, there's not that many of us.
There's
Just
not
want
that
to-
many of us that stick around for
in the
this
small
long.
business category.
Yes.
I'm not about corporate, league. That's a completely different. It's being, in the corporate league, working for big corporation like Google or Shopify and stuff like that. That's common. But in a small self-employed category, small business or local business, that's quite unique. That's for sure, 100%.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to another things. You one of the rarest kind entrepreneur that manufacture everything yourself, home-based here in Montreal. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. The manufacturing is like so expensive with our labor cost in Canada, all the regulations and taxes and things like that. How do you keep it home? How did you stay away from outsourcing it? I mean,
Well, so it's not in my home anymore. So we didn't finish that.
I'm
We
not
didn't
like-
finish that story. But so 2011, I was able to quit my job.
Yes.
And then I, relatively soon after that, received orders at a scale where I knew that this could not work in my home
Yes.
anymore. Like I lived on the second floor and I had an interior staircase. And on every step, there was product stored, like raw materials, like stored all the way up the staircase. And then every room had shelving. Like I just basically was camping out in a corner of my apartment and had transformed the rest of it into manufacturing space at a certain point. So I knew that this was not going to work anymore. And I was at a point where I knew that I probably needed help. And I know some people do it, have employees who come into their home. I was not wanting that to have that specific mix of responsibilities. And so I signed a commercial lease for a space here in Montreal for just raw manufacturing space, and then moved into that on Halloween 2011. So October 31st. So really
Oh my
about
God.
now. Yeah, like next week, this week. And there was nothing in it. I just remember because I had been working from my home, like we had no industrial shelving. We had very small scale shelving. I had no industrial tables. So like it was a real, I just remember
You had to
looking
buy
around.
everything.
I had to buy everything. And I remember looking around and being like, okay, so I have the space now. There's just got nothing in it. What are we going to do with this? And so
I remember that time where you were actually buying your first industrial equipment.
Yep.
All the industrial machinery.
I actually had some industrial equipment in my kitchen. I had a soap melter actually that used to sit on my kitchen table before moving out, which is really like the fact that it got that far is really, I should have made that move before. But overall, I am, it's easy to see this looking back, but I am now, and I was then, risk adverse. I really am. And so the fact that there was industrial equipment in my kitchen is probably, that's the symptom of like, I mean, obviously I should not have had that in my kitchen. Obviously I should have moved out faster, but was probably scared of the cash flow implications of that, was certainly didn't feel like I knew what I was doing in terms of finding a commercial space and knowing how to work out a commercial lease. So those are all skills that I've learned one at a time, probably more slowly than I could have or should have, because I am risk adverse. I always have been.
But as you move into the full production in your commercial place, how you decide not to outsource to China, because we always have to look in our cash flow, our marginality. Marginality is huge. And of course, bottom line, and with industries outsourcing majority of the production overseas because the labor cost and all the stuff, it's easier.
So in our category, outsourcing is not so much to China. In general, people do not really trust cosmetics or products used on the skin made in China. Sometimes there will be either Japanese or Korean outsourcing, but in general, in my segment, co-packers are actually still local. So they would be either in Canada or in the US.
Okay.
And the real answer to why we didn't do that was simply cash. So I wouldn't have had in 2011 an amount of capital that would have permitted me to place initial orders. And I would say that the other factor that pushed me to not do it at that time would simply have been that I didn't know the steps of how to figure it out and how to do it myself. That has since changed. I have had stuff manufactured for us externally since then. I know how to do that process. I know how to run that process. There's a variety of reasons why we still don't do it. My margins are excellent because we do our own manufacturing, because I have no middleman. We buy our own raw materials. We do our own transformation. During COVID, interestingly, it gave us a real competitive advantage against brands like ours who were mainly using external co-packers, because everything got jammed up in those co-packers systems, right?
Yeah,
orders were not being
that.
delivered. Stuff was not being delivered. And so we still had issues as well, because we had difficulty getting our raw materials, difficulty getting our packaging. There was a shortage of basically everything. But in terms of the actual manufacturing, we were completely in charge of our own destiny, and that has turned out to be a very useful and flexible tool. And so the real answer is just that I ended up in that just based on my skill set and where I was comfortable. And now, there are certain products where we occasionally will work with an external co-packer to have them made. I don't at all object to the idea of things made not by us, but I will say that in part of how you're mentioning that we have a lot of repeat business, like our core customer, they like that we do everything from scratch. They like that we are the manufacturers, that things are still handmade, that it is still a small team. I think that that's a huge part of our marketing and our message. I don't think that would be entirely lost if we worked with external co-packers, but I do think that people like the idea of something that is made from scratch here. As you're saying, there is a huge, the running a larger team, making sure that everything safety-wise is sorted out on our team. All of that that's our everyday challenges, right? Like every time we tick over into some category where I have to retool something, buy new machinery, hire more staff, or put, new procedures into place, I question myself as to whether that's the ongoing vision. For now, it's still something that I think is like deeply part of the DNA of our brand.
The other thing I wanted to talk about, over the course of this business journey that you had, you become a mom.
Yes.
Of two beautiful girls,
Yes.
two beautiful angels. Tell me how the motherhood influence in terms of your approach to business.
Okay, so firstly, I'm going to need to insist that when you have following male guests that you also ask them this question.
I will.
Because I feel like female entrepreneurs get asked this question an unfair amount. But
Nobody ever asked me that.
Really?
Never, ever. I sometimes, occasionally, when I do credit application or open an account somewhere
Yes.
with another supplier, or somebody wants to touch more in the personal, they'll say, "Oh, do you have any kids?" and stuff like that. But never have I ever, nobody asked me ever if I have kids and how the motherhood. So I don't know where you've heard, but nobody interviewed me and asked me. Maybe
I
don't
just feel
project
like
an
every
image.
time I listen to, something like this,
Yeah.
any sort of entrepreneurial story, it's a very common question. And I think it's a totally fair question because that figuring out how those things are going to work together
Yes.
is difficult. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, you already had your kids when you
I went
started your
into the
current
business.
business. You
I
had
went into
other
business.
sort of businesses
Yeah.
before. But I came at it from the flip side of I started my business long before I had children. And certainly I specifically waited because I could not imagine what that would look like in my life.
And how it is now.
Yes. Well, and then unfortunately, I had the very poor timing of I was pregnant with my first baby when COVID started. So I announced my pregnancy to my team in early March 2020.
Oh, wow.
And I had already told you, I
Yes,
think.
you told me. That you told me.
Because we were at a
the
trade show
show.
in New York
Yes.
in late February 2020.
And we went out.
And we went out for a drink, and I
Yes.
didn't drink. And so that
Yes,
was
exactly.
sort of a
So I kind of-
telltale for me
Yeah.
because I like a glass of wine. So, I had announced my pregnancy. I have other friends who decided to start families during COVID because things had slowed down for them. This was not. I would never have picked this combination. So basically, I ended up in a really intense combination of being a mom for the first time, running a manufacturing business through a huge crisis, and just that combination of global pandemic, mom for the first time, entrepreneurship. 0 out of 10. Do not recommend. Terrible, terrible combo. Really, really difficult. Probably the hardest thing I've ever done, the hardest period I've ever lived through. And, there were so many glorious parts of it. I love my daughter. I loved being a mom. I like what I do, but I would say it's been 4 years. I still feel like I'm only recovering. And I've since had a second baby
Yes.
who's 11 months old. And just the difference in the experience between that first time and that second time of when I became a mom for the first time, I didn't know what parts of that were difficult because it was right in the middle of a pandemic and what parts of that were just difficult because that was part of being a mom. So certainly my experience the second time has been totally different. But yeah, figuring out how to run an in-person manufacturing business with an in-person team is difficult as a combination with being a parent anyway. And then figuring that out through pandemic was extremely difficult. And then I travel a lot, right? So before I had my kids, I was probably traveling 60 or 70 days a year for shows. And I have greatly reduced that. That was sort of the gift of the pandemic, is that most of that was paused or most of that was externalized to outside sales representatives because I couldn't go back and forth over the Canada-US border. There was too much of a quarantine. It just wasn't going to work. So whereas in normal times, I probably would have had to start traveling again when my baby was quite small. The first time I really had, I didn't travel until she was almost 2, I think, or 18 months old, something like that. Whereas this second time, she was at a trade show with me when she was 8 weeks old.
So cute.
So yes, definitely a different experience.
So you're bringing your daughter, right? You're showing your kids right away how the business is made. So they see it. They are born in it.
Yes, born in it.
And that brings me to my next question. what piece of advice would you give to them that would carry them through their life? What would you give to them, to your daughters?
Ooh. I think that the main thing that I wish for them is a very, very strong idea of who they are and their own self-worth and really self-confidence. It is the number one gift that I think I can help give them. And I say that from their perspective of someone who has like just raging imposter syndrome that I have been working on for the past 16 years in everything that I do. And now, I mean, I've been working on that for a long time. I think that's the work of a lifetime. I will eventually figure that out. But I think for them, no matter what they try and do, whether it's that they start a business, whether it's that they have a project, they're artists, they're athletes, no matter what it is, I just cannot think of any situation where having a very strong idea of their own self-worth will not serve them extremely well.
That's great advice. Mm-hmm. Yes. Tell me, like, over the time, did you had any like business mentors? Have you read some books? I know you're self-taught entrepreneur, and over like the course of journey you've learned, as you were telling before. But did you had any mentors or any influential books or stories that you kind of followed?
So many. Like I just love everything. My favorite is always just stories. So hearing how people worked through things. So like I love like how I built this podcast, everything that is like piece by piece understanding how people did something. I love all of that. And I just, I think I read a lot too. Like I read a lot of fiction outside of entrepreneurship. And so I think that storytelling feeling of like really understanding how someone did something step by step is always probably the most influential for me. I have had mentors. More important, I think, than mentors has been having other entrepreneurs like you or other people like that, where I can really, send a message and be like, "Ooh, this has been a tough couple of months." Like I'm either in a good way or a bad way. Like so, like huge growth comes with huge problems. Like it's often like the moments where things are most difficult for me as an entrepreneur are generally either when things are very, 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 very slow or very, very, very much growing quickly. Those are the two things that are hardest to manage. So being able to reach out to other entrepreneurs who have some idea what you're talking about in that time is the most precious thing, because entrepreneurship is really lonely.
It is. People don't realize
really
that.
lonely. You're not going to turn around and complain to your staff.
No, you can't do that. No.
When something is not going well, when you don't know what you're doing, when you have no idea what the next move is, when things like a global pandemic get thrown at you that you've never experienced but that you need to lead through, it's not your team. You can be upfront with your team. You can, I have learned a lot about leadership. I actually think it is one of my strong suits now. That has certainly not always been the case. But that is not who you're going to, it is not your team that you're going to turn to in those situations. You really need to have someone else who has similar experiences to be able to relate to. It is, depends on who your friends and family are, but in all likelihood, it's also not your friends and family unless they have also been through it. I have an extremely strong support system. I have a wonderful husband. I have friends, lifelong friends. I have a very strong connection with my family. Still, those are not the people who, on the 15th time that I'm telling them the story about the difficult cash flow, they'll be very sympathetic. They don't have anything necessarily other than love to offer me in that moment. And so it is really other entrepreneurs that are going to be able to say to you like, "Oh yeah, well, firstly, here's some ideas of what I've tried that's worked," but also just even if they have no suggestion, just being like, "Oh yes, I understand." And that feeling of having someone who understands what it is that you're going through is precious, because otherwise it's extremely isolating. And frankly, generally entrepreneurs do not have very good mental health. Like there are huge amounts of mental health challenges within the entrepreneurial community that don't really get talked about.
Nobody talks about it. And
Nobody
it's
talks
actually
about it.
funny. I released a small short video like on Reels about how is the entrepreneurial journey, about the cash flow and, sleeping and worrying and thinking about, your sales and the Google and all this stuff. And how that story resonated, all business owners wrote to me, "Oh my God, bingo. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. You nailed
because
it.
it's an almost inhuman level of intensity and
Yes.
stress, really.
Yes.
Not all businesses, do I believe that there are some businesses that can be structured in such a way to avoid all of that? Sure. I mean, most small business owners have at least some periods of like really intense, no idea whether it's going to work, ongoing intensity, anxiety, and stress, just unexpected things. I said to one of to our coordinator recently, he was like, oh, well, this, terrible unexpected thing has happened, but like, how can we make sure that this never happens again? And I was like, well, that's an excellent question. And, I think there are a few things we can put in place to make sure this specific problem does not in fact happen again. But just to be clear, if you're looking to make sure that no, surprising, terrible thing happens again, like, you are out of luck, because a surprising, terrible thing will definitely happen to us again. It'll just be a new one that we're not expecting.
I like how you're softly guiding him
I'm
to
like,
diffuse
I
the
see
things.
what
but
you're
then,
doing there. Some great operational questions that we definitely could put some time and effort into, but also like you need to get really comfortable being uncomfortable.
And how does business success looks for you and feels for you? Tell me about that.
I mean, I feel like I am not there. I don't, I have a lot of pride about what I have done, but I think my version of success is not something that I feel I have attained, in the sense that there is a level of wanting to have a healthier relationship with my business personally that I certainly am not at currently. I still get pulled more deeply into the parts of my business. Every entrepreneur has things that really should be their job, that is their strengths that they should be working on. And every entrepreneur gets pulled away from those into other parts of their business occasionally. I am still too frequently getting pulled into the parts of my business that should no longer be on my plate. And so therefore I cannot in all honesty sit here, and I'm not currently at a place where I feel like there is the correct blend of activities going on for me personally. And my mantra the past 2 years, let's say, has really been that I need to remember that my business is here to serve me, and I am not here to serve my business. And that is a tough one for me. I
love that.
I too frequently jump into like, I need to do all the things. Like I need to make sure that I'm doing personally whatever needs to be done to get our business to the next level, or to avoid whatever crisis we're currently going through, because there's always something. And it is very difficult for me to really stay in a place and remind myself that like, actually, it doesn't really matter what it looks like externally if it is currently serving me well personally. And I'm not great at that. And I really have to continually remind myself.
Okay, well, then tell me what professionally and personally do you want to achieve? Like, what's your next level? Tell me about that.
So I think that's a bit blurry for me right now.
Oh.
I know that's not the succinct answer you're looking for, but I think that it's important to talk about that, because there are tons of stages of entrepreneurship where actually you don't quite know what's next. Economically, things are weird right now in both Canada and the US, which is our two major markets. We mainly, so 90% of what we do is we sell to other businesses. So we're mainly wholesalers. We sell a little bit direct to consumer, but we mainly sell to other businesses. And retail is not doing great at the moment. So our business has had a variety of shape shifts in the past year or so, and that'll continue. And I think for myself personally, what I would love is to know that I'm getting to a place where I am making sure that I am mainly doing activities that make me happy and make me feel fulfilled. And I'm still currently being pulled into the operational situation of trying to figure out how to lead through a recession, basically. And so, yeah, we're still figuring that out.
So you don't have any specific set goals that you want to be, let's say,
I think
7,000
my personal
stores,
goal, I think my
team of
personal
20.
goal would be to get back to working mainly on what are my core competencies, which is really product development, branding, and design. And so that's a huge goal for me because right now that's not what my day-to-day is looking like. And then for the business, I would say figuring out a path forward that allows us to continue to do what we love, which perhaps looks like doing more direct to consumer. That is the fastest growing part of our business. It has never been the core of our business, but I feel like probably it is what would allow us to more thoroughly control our own destiny at this stage.
And how different your, let's say, communication when you, let's say, working with the giants like Macy's and versus, let's say, a B2C consumer? How different is your voice?
It's a little more straight to the point and utilitarian.
Money base. So it's a money base conversation with the, let's say, Macy's.
No, it's so in any kind of marketing, you kind of just have to figure out how to get into people's heads. So, for example, we recently had a sale to our wholesale customers, which we never do. Our sales are always, get a free item, get free testers on your order for your store, get, 6 free of the new, like a free case of whatever the new product is. That's always the way we choose to have sales. And that's relatively true for direct to consumer too. I have always really shied away from percentage-based sales or anything that is like a cheapening of the perceived value of our product. So I will give away free product all day before I put something on sale, usually.
Yeah.
And it's also the most affordable way for me to do it because we do have good margins on what we make. It is more expensive for me to give away a percentage off a sales price than to give away a product. And for the customer, it feels like a present. It feels like a gift. And that is a good feeling. And you're more likely to associate those good feelings to that brand in the future than if you get a percentage off. So generally, we don't do percentages off. And then recently, our stores have been struggling. And because we are also a small business, firstly, that affects our sales when they're struggling. But secondly, I know what that feels like. And I'm able to place myself in that business owner's mind space and understand what it is that they're going through. And so we had a percentage-based sale for our wholesale customers, which we never do. But most importantly, I wrote them a letter. And the whole sale was basically a special letter to our retailers, basically just acknowledging what it was that they have been going through recently and saying that we understand that it's been really tough times and that while we know that there are some of them who are killing it, we also know that a lot of them are closing or going through very close to going out of business experiences and that we want to be there for them and go through it with them. And as you're saying about that reel, like the level to which this resonated was very intense. And we in consequence, what happens when you get marketing right and when the message is right and you're speaking to that customer the way they want to be spoken to, and when they feel heard, the result is that they give you their money. So we, in a 4-day sale or a 3-day sale, we did the equivalent of like 6 weeks in sales.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So operationally, we're still...
This is like 101 right there.
Operationally, we are still digging our way out of that one, by the way. But yeah.
So, which leads me to, what advice would you give to your younger self, knowing what you know now? What would you say to yourself?
I would say a combination probably of pausing to make sure that all of the hard work that I am doing is working towards something that works for me personally as well as for my business, because I don't think that that has always been the case. I think some self-reflection on that would have been probably a good thing. And then probably to make sure that I'm in some way working on myself personally as well as the business. So, for example, watching out for things like my own mental health to make sure that I don't get to a stage of burnout, which I've been through multiple times, which most business owners I know have been through multiple times and which doesn't get spoken about. But you really cannot advance your business or your brand if you are personally stuck
not good
or not in a good place. And almost all business owners go through that and almost no one talks about it. So I do think that that is probably the number one thing I would say to my young self is like, watch out for that. Make sure you're taking, I think telling myself to take time would not have worked. I think telling myself to pay attention to my own feelings would have been the most precious, because I think it would have been a really hard sell to tell my young self, like, take a bunch of time for yourself, make sure you're resting, like, would not have happened. Take some mind space at least to check in with yourself,
Yeah.
would have at least maybe had a chance of
What do you
being
do for
heard.
your mind space?
Well, my kids are great for that, because there's really no way that you can be fully with them and also be paying, it forces you to slow down and to be in the moment. So I think that has really pushed me towards like more of figuring out how I am actually doing. And then I would say, anything like making sure that I'm getting enough sleep is a huge one.
Yes,
I
think
stopped
that's
many
huge.
years ago now. Well, many years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I stopped working in the evening unless I absolutely need to. And that was a game changer for me, because it really, a few weeks ago, I actually ended up working in the evening just because I really needed to do something. Did like maybe 40 minutes of just like whatever it was that I was doing on my computer. Took me 3 days to like get back into like a proper. When
Wow.
I work in the evening, it activates like every little sensor in my brain that is available, and I will not sleep well that night, even if I'm done, like even if the thing is totally done. So I did the thing, it's finished, it's put away, like that should make me sleep better. But no, it's like it creates a level of sort of adrenaline and stimulation in me that means that like it wrecks that night of sleep, therefore it wrecks the next morning, therefore it really starts a vicious cycle. So that's like a huge gift I've given myself of like, it's not productive. It's not efficient for me to work in the evening, because it really ruins several following days.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
I actually, on my tips, first of all, I introduced meditation about 10 years ago. So I meditate religiously every morning. And if I have time, I try to do it in the afternoon as well, like towards the evening, to just kind of clear your mind, because you're anxious all the time.
Yes.
You're constantly calculating, you're making decisions, your mind and constantly going in 1,000 different directions, making choices, quick choices.
Oh, the choices. And that's parenting really adds to that one, by the way. Can I just say, like, you're constantly making decisions that affect other people's well-being, both as a parent
100%.
and a business owner who has a team.
Yeah.
And so like the combo of those two things just means that like mentally getting a break from that responsibility is difficult. Reading is the number one thing for me, like reading fiction before bed, not reading a business book. I read business books too, but in the evening, really making sure that I'm like doing something that is very distracting. Sometimes it can look like watching a show. Basically, what I've learned about myself is I actually really need some sort of distraction to unhook myself physically and mentally and emotionally from whatever I've been doing that day. So reading or watching something that's very distracting, or whatever other activity. Sometimes that looks like obsessively organizing my spice cabinet. It really doesn't matter, as long as I'm doing something that is distracting enough that it unhooks me from what I was doing during the day.
Do you see any professional help? I do, because for me, it helps me to be because there are certain type of beliefs and certain type of like vibes or programs that we're playing in our mind over and over, that personal professional from outside that I go see, let's say therapist, allows you to kind of catch you when something doesn't serve you,
Yes.
and give you that reflection, and kind of all of a sudden break that pattern and free yourself from that over and over and over anxiety. I think over the course of 2 decades, I did some hypnotherapy, to overcome some overload or like anxious feelings that had to do with paying suppliers and being on time with the bills, because and the amount of risk and financial risk, you're pretty much gambling with your own cash, ladies and gentlemen, and you're borrowing at full responsibility 100%. So whenever bank says they fully co-sign you, so there's no way out unless you play in a larger corporate game, which you have a legal team to serve you and save you. But other than that, and of course, I do see on a regular basis the therapist that helps me kind of to reflect on some of the challenges I go through. It's
Yeah.
important to share. And of course, 12 years of our getting together and just talking.
Yes. So that's always my first
Sacred space.
My first move is really like figuring out someone personally
Professional.
known to me that
Yeah.
I can speak to honestly and openly. So that's very important in my life. But yes, in 2018,
Yeah.
I was really in a place where like the business had grown enough that I had a team. So I was figuring out leadership on a larger scale. I would say at that stage we probably had 6 employees or 5 employees. Figuring out how to run a manufacturing team, how to like, extricate myself from certain operational things over time had really taken a toll on me. And also, I mentioned that in the very beginning of my business, I was working basically 20 hours a day. And I really worked, I would say I worked 18 to 20, like 16 to 20 hours a day until I met my husband in 2013. And then I scaled it back a little bit, stopped sleeping at the warehouse occasionally, and I think like that, all of that gets really glamorized in a lot of business stories, but like it is not glamorous. It is very much how you make yourself unwell. And I say that fully knowing that I'm not sure that it would have been possible to do what I have done without doing it. And so there's really a double-edged sword there of like, it's really easy having gone through it to turn around and tell other entrepreneurs just starting out, like, don't do that or watch out for that. But by the way, I don't know how I would have gotten where I am without doing it. Like, that's a really challenging message. So the one thing I can say is like, there is a cost, and I think it's a cost that needs to be talked about. And so by 2018, I was really struggling. I think my anxiety, like it's always difficult to frame anxiety in an entrepreneurship context because we legitimately have like a lot to be anxious about.
Yes.
So like anxiety, like diagnosed anxiety is when you're like your reaction to things is sort of out of proportion to what is actually happening around you. But like a lot of the time there's like actually very anxiety inducing things happening around you. So I will just say that, by that point I remember we had gone on vacation. And I was sitting looking at what I still now know to be probably the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen in my life. And I remember watching this beautiful peach-colored sunset and being like, there is something wrong if I'm not able to enjoy this. Like I just was not, even when I paused, right? Even when I took time off and like, I just was not, there was too much of a deficit. There was like years of overworking and too much intensity and not at all being in touch with myself or my
emotions
anything.
Exactly.
Because when you stop listening to those signals, your body and mind just kind of go like, okay, we'll stop sending them. We'll stop sending those signals until there's like some sort of crash and burn. And that's really where I was in 2018. At that point, I did start going to therapy. And what has worked for me is that the therapist that I see is a therapist, but she is also a leadership coach, an executive coach,
Wow.
and an organizational psychologist.
So she comes from that background of
and
business.
I really think
so
that is key for me because I feel like it would have been very easy for most therapists that I would have seen in 2018 to look at what I was doing and what my life looked like and been like, well, I know what the problem is. You have to stop doing that, which would have been a completely valid response, by the way, because it really was not a healthy or sustainable structure at that time. And I really was working way too much and taking on way too much personally and had not yet figured out all of the details that I have over the past few years of like how to do that in a way that protects myself a little bit more from the emotional impact of leadership, for example. And I am a person who feels things deeply. And this is something I have learned through work with her of like, I do think that there are entrepreneurs who can be the kinds of team leaders that I am and feel it a lot less. Like I am very good at that kind of team leadership in the sense that I do the right thing. I'm able to make the right call in the moment and I'm able to coach people through it and I'm able to have difficult conversations. But I really make myself pay for it afterwards. Like I relive those moments. I feel them very deeply. And I do think that, that makes it more challenging because I know that there are people out there who can do those things and not just they've gotten better at it over time. Like they truly actually don't feel it as intensely on an emotional level themselves. So, that's just how I am made. And so I have to figure out how to engage with that kind of leadership work and those kinds of tough conversations while also keeping myself safe. And that is the work of a lifetime.
Oh, I think it's beautiful. I wanted to wrap it up, our discussion, and to our listeners and people who watch us, what's next for Dot and Lil? Are you guys preparing special events? We're coming to holiday season. It's so exciting. You always get the best gifts. You always get the best products that people love to buy for themselves to spoil themselves, and of course to bring it as a gift. So what do you have coming up for the next couple of months?
Yes. So we're currently working on shipping out all of our orders, mainly from that sale I mentioned, to our independent brick and mortar retailers across Canada and the US. So on our website, dotandlil.com, there's a list of all of those stores that will soon be receiving all of their lovely holiday orders. So you can shop at your local Dot and Lil retailer. And then people can always shop on dotandlil.com. And we have a promo code that you can offer that is podcast, where people will get 15% off. And so I do encourage people to also buy something for themselves because, by the way, you're much better at choosing gifts, especially fragranced gifts. Like, they make a lovely gift for other people, but people are really most able to determine what they themselves want. And on the theme of taking care of ourselves, as I was just talking about, I think people should also buy something for themselves.
Awesome. And what we're going to do also, we have a sets of gifts. I'll match Anne as well. We have a sets of gifts from my product line, WAF. And we will offer another 50% off from WAF. And we will include all the promo codes at the bottom on the description of the podcast, all the links as well to the website so people could go and check it out. On that note, I wanted to thank you so much for coming to my podcast and sharing your inspirational story. It's been such an honor to walk side by side you through this business journey as a friend as well. Without your support, it would be so lonely, and I'm deeply grateful for that.
Well, thank you for listening to me for the past little while we've been speaking today, but also for the past 14 years.
14 years. I'm telling you, this business journey was definitely a roller coaster. We went through quite a lot together, through highs and lows, unknown and known, and exciting moments, and sharing those tips and supporting one another and giving each other that advice when you need it, or sharing that wisdom or know-how and things like that. I think it was like absolutely, there is not even a price tag to put it. It's like so valuable. And I'm super honored. So thank you so much. And to all our listeners and people that are watching, if you wanted to, please subscribe to my podcast. It would mean the world. Please write your comments. Also, if you want to learn more about Anne and Dot and Lil business, we're going to leave the links below for her Instagram and the website, so you could subscribe to Dot and Lil. And don't forget to use the promo code that we're going to mention as well. And the best comment, I think, let's give out a gift. Let's put together a gift package.
Okay.
We will choose in the next 3 weeks the best comment, and we will contact you and send you a gift package all the way from Montreal. So thank you so much.
Thank you.